my sunshine, my only sunshine.
I'm guessing you've heard this song before. Welcome to Jimmy's Old Time Radio Show. You Are My Sunshine was popularized by a few music pioneers in the 1930s, including the subject of this study, Wilfred Arthur Charles Carter, professionally known as Wilf Carter, the father of Canadian country music, well known in the day for his version of this song, a song I have requested regularly at my retirement home concerts. Born December 18, 1904, in Port Hilford, Nova Scotia, Wilf was one of 9 children, raised in the East, later growing up near the village of Canning in the Annapolis River Valley. There are not a lot of pictures of Wilf in his childhood. He goes all the way back to the beginnings of photography. Wilf Carter's unique style started as an imitation of a musician he saw in concert as a boy, part of a traveling vaudeville show that came to town, the Yodeling Fool, it impressing him with an Austrian-Swiss yodeling style that may have already been familiar to him. In a song years later, Wilf mentions his Swiss father. As a young teen, when failing to meet the expectations of his Baptist minister father, austere and upset with Wilf's disinterest in the church and his constant yodeling, Wilf left home, perhaps forcefully, perhaps willingly, at the young age of 15, still a boy, barely a man. Working as a lumberjack in the eastern U.S. and Canada, crafting his singing with hobos and railroad boxcars, Wilf Carter one day saw a poster in the Canning train station advertising for workers to help with the harvest in Western Canada. At 19 years old, he boarded the train and embarked on a journey that would open up his story. After farming the prairies a couple of seasons, he ended up in Calgary, Alberta, where he found work as a cowboy, earning extra money singing and playing his guitar on the streets and at dances. He became a true Westerner, embracing the life of a cowboy, breaking bones riding broncos at the Calgary Stampede, working on the Great Plains and in the mountains. A tall, strapping, personable young man, he always seemed to have a pretty girl nearby. In what few photos we have from this time, a young man in the splendor of Western Canada, the scenery and people inspired him to start writing songs, honest biographical music that became his style, a true folk musician by definition. What his music may have lacked in complexity was compensated with in passion. But his boyhood dream to be a singer was hampered early by the Great Depression. Fortunately for him, though, early radio stations were just appearing on the Canadian landscape. Confident in his music already, he approached radio station CFCN out of Glenbow, Alberta, just north of Calgary, to ask to sing on the radio. His first request denied, being told he wasn't ready, come back in a year, which he did, still determined to be a singer. The station finally agreed, and Carter performed his first radio broadcast in 1930. In those days, radio was entirely different than it is now. A musician of some noteworthiness could hope to perform live on air and even have a regular programming slot. So if you had talent and personality enough to get airplay, you could reach an audience. There weren't a lot of choices of stations in those days. Perhaps just 2 or 3 might cut through the crackle. So if you were on the air, you had direct access to your audience and you could become a household name. A bellowing baritone with a strong yodeling style, like a falsetto, high in the throat, he developed his style in a time when there were no microphones, when singers sang to project, strong in the diaphragm. His yodeling was referred to as echo style, or as 3-in-1. In one biography, I read his sound was thought to be a studio effect. I would argue that it was not, as it wouldn't be until the 1950s that echo effects would be used in recordings. His early sound was real, and he yodeled with great mastery, a style he'd not deviate from throughout his career. That early self-projecting style also manifested in his guitar playing, usually very simple, straight-ahead strumming with punctuated bass notes, using his thumb and a thumb pick usually. Music designed to be played unamplified to an open space, like in a prairie work camp or a campfire in a mountain valley. His high, lonesome voice grew popular among Western rural folk, and soon after he would be heard nationally on CRBC radio. I don't know if his father was alive at the time, but I wonder what he would have thought of his son's yodeling on the radio, if the old missionary ever even heard him, I've uncovered nothing to suggest that he did. Wilf was enjoying life entertaining tourists as a trail rider for the Canadian Pacific Railway, who promoted horseback excursions into the mountains. Carter's popularity grew in the region as he performed at tourist parties throughout the Rockies. Timing is everything in the music business, and Wilf Carter's career would be 3 times bolstered by new technologies. First by these early radio stations, which transmitted through affordable old-time radios, often one of the few luxuries a poor farming family would allow itself. And not long after, the gramophone would bring for the first time recorded music into the homes of listeners. It's hard to imagine now the impact of hearing those mysterious thick 78 records for the first time. Later again in the 1950s, his career would be lifted by television. He seemed to be always in the right moment for each of those innovations. The CPR was so impressed by their customers' reactions to his performances that he was invited to sing on the luxury cruise liner, the SS Empress of Britain, in 1933. While on his way to board the ship, he stopped at a small studio in Montreal for his first ever recording session, laying down 2 songs, the A-side, My Swiss Moonlight Lullaby, and the B-side, The Capture of Albert Johnson, a biographical song about the mad trapper of the Northwest. Wilf had become known for writing songs about Canadian people and stories of interest. My Swiss Moonlight Lullaby demonstrated also his Swiss style of yodeling. The 2 songs pressed for the then new gramophone and supplied to radio. 2 weeks later he would return from his voyage aboard the Empress and be greeted with celebration. His record had become instantly popular on radio, becoming a bestseller in 1934, the first hit ever recorded by a Canadian country performer. Notoriety and prosperity found in the middle of the Great Depression. He signed with the branch of RCA Victor under the condition he would move back to the mountains and write more songs, which I'm sure he gladly did for another season. But ambitions and growing demand saw Wilf move to New York City in 1935, where he performed for WABC Radio, and then for a CBS country music program until 1937, propelling him into popularity. While in the US, he was tagged with the name Montana Slim to differentiate him from the popular American group, the Carter family, of which he was no relation. Wilf was not above changing his persona, though, to further himself, or to use it as advertisement. He was, after all, trying to earn a living in the midst of the Great Depression. He would become one of the few artists who were successful under more than one name, his real name and the pseudonym. Wilf sang in advertisements for Lucky Strike cigarettes, though he never smoked a day in his life. Was endorsing a product he didn't use a sellout, or was it a business decision? Opportunism. Attaching his name to a cigarette brand was a lucrative opportunity in those lean years. Coming from poverty, the Great Depression now 7 years long, during truly desperate times for many, how could he say no? Singing as Montana Slim to a huge audience undoubtedly helped propel his career. Carter would marry and return to Alberta with his young wife, Bobby, where they purchased a ranch. He continued to appear on both American and Canadian radio shows, as well as perform live concerts, his popularity a phenomenon for the time. But in 1940, just as the world was loosening the grip of the Great Depression, it was falling into the teeth of World War II, and it so happened that at that time Wilf Carter was seriously injured in a car accident in Montana, breaking his back, unable to perform for nearly a decade. Very difficult times. But his popularity would be sustained by periodically releasing new recordings, as he eked out a living with radio airplay and record sales during his long rehabilitation. At last emerging from his injuries to resume his career, he had his first and only appearance on the Grand Ole Opry in 1947. Not being invited back to be a member, probably because of his simplistic style, it was a setback to his career, but he struggled on, self-managing, self-funding. His strong vocal style and honest songs kept him popular among the common folk. He sold his ranch in 1949 and moved his family to a farm in New Jersey, resuming live performances across Canada. In 1950, he attracted over 50,000 people during a week of shows at the Canadian National Exhibition Bandstand in Toronto. Then moving to Florida in 1952, he opened the Wilf Carter Motor Lodge, a venture lasting only 2 years. Because now, fully rehabilitated and only in 40, it was time to be back on the road, this time with 2 young daughters on stage with him, calling it the family show with folks you know. His daughters Carol and Sheila worked as dancers and backup singers through their summer holidays, and it's said they never complained and became seasoned veterans of the stage themselves. The next 20 years were a whirlwind. In 1951, Wilf's new manager, Ken Reynolds, arranged for concerts in over 250 communities across Canada. Wilf's first real Canadian tour, with management, often visiting hospitals and nursing homes to sing for the infirm during the day, before the main event in the evening. Wilf has always been known to sing for the elderly. Through the 1950s, Ken Reynolds was entrusted to organize ambitious, multi-week tours, despite being a novice manager. His excellent work, though, created a partnership that lasted 10 years and cemented Wilf Carter's fame across North America, even as far as Australia, leading into the early days of television. In 1964, Carter performed for the first time in the Calgary Stampede, an event he loved. He also became one of the most requested guests on the TV show The Tommy Hunter Show, who commented about Wilf's guitar style, saying how he whacked the strings so hard they'd go out of tune, and he'd seem to whack them even harder to try to get them back into tune. Wilf Carter was inducted into the Nashville Songwriters Hall of Fame in 1971, into the Canadian Country Music Hall of Fame in 1984, then into the Canadian Music Hall of Fame and the Juno Awards Hall of Fame in 1985. In 1991, at the age of 86, Wilf Carter made his last concert tour, appropriately called the Last Roundup, with shows across Canada, he retiring the following year due to a loss of hearing. As always, even until the end, he played for seniors. The audience had grown old with him. Wilf Carter would die of stomach cancer in 1996 in Scottsdale, Arizona, 13 days before his 92nd birthday. A few words about my personal, small connection to Wilf Carter. I was first drawn to his story through the autobiography of his manager in the 1950s, Ken Reynolds. Ken's wife, Dorothy, was a resident at Carolina Suites Retirement Home in Perth, Ontario, where a few years ago I had performed a couple of concerts there. Dorothy approached me at the end of one and gifted me with a copy of the book, a delightful gift which I promptly read and enjoyed. The book, these songs, that meeting with Dorothy, these are examples of our fleeting, disappearing connection to the legends. Ken Reynolds' book was my first real education in Wilf Carter and vastly opened up my understanding of the country music scene of the 1950s. It fascinates me now how happenstances factored into forming the life and legend of Wilf Carter, like his seeing that poster in the train station, or finding work singing for the CPR, which led to his fateful gig on the Empress of Britain. All that tying into his first studio recording session, to the outset of radio and the gramophone. And what if he hadn't seen the yodeling fool perform as a child? Would he still have become a musician? Or would his style still have included that trademark yodel? I'm guessing that he would have still been an artist, a singer, a songwriter, a guitar player, as it seemed to truly come from his spirit. He was determined, and he lived a charmed and blessed life, truly a folk musician, one that didn't like to rehearse, one that drew inspiration from his surroundings and the people he met. His songs rose from him like campfire smoke, and I can imagine them echoing through the mountain valleys, songs about yearning for love, or bursting with patriotism and gratefulness, simple music for ordinary people. On June 26, 1951, 69 years ago to the day as I released this video, Wilf Carter was performing in Owen Sound, Ontario, not far from where I live, even then in his 40s, just hitting full stride, with decades of feel-good music still ahead. His longevity and good nature are legendary. He's said to be a composer of 500 songs, and over 8 decades of performing, he never changed his style or his honest approach. Wilf Carter was named Honorary Chief of the Stoney Indian Tribe and Honorary Citizen of the City of Winnipeg and the State of Tennessee. He appeared in no Hollywood movies despite popularity in the U.S. Wilf Carter delivered music during some of our darkest periods, the Great Depression and World War II, and his sound penetrated the psyche of the listeners. He leveraged emerging media technologies. It's a story that just won't happen that way again. It's from a time where music and history meet.
sunshine. You make me happy when skies are gray. You'll never know, dear, how much I love you. Please don't take my sunshine away.